cue to let's stand for prayer, please. In the name of the Father and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, everywhere present and filling all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell within us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O gracious one. In the name of the Father and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Glory to Jesus Christ. Okay, when we last left off, we were talking about, if you remember, I was really excited last week because Daniel's going to reveal. Do we remember what the big revealing thing was last week? Very important, and yeah, Diane. Gary. Well, no, this is the very end. This is the end. Yeah, I just want to point one thing out, but I have to bring that up before I can point out the next thing. And the big thing was that Daniel talked about the resurrection. The resurrection, that the people are going to experience the resurrection, and that there is everlasting life. Very important principle, very important dogma. In fact, it's part of our creed. This is the creed that we read and pray every Sunday. The last sentence says, I expect the resurrection of the dead. This is exactly what Daniel was saying, resurrection of the dead. He was talking about individual resurrection as opposed to people like Isaiah and the others. They were talking about as a nation, as a whole. Maybe we're splitting hairs there, but that's the scholars seem to make a difference there. So Daniel was specific about the resurrection of the dead and the life of the world to come. Amen. Life of the world to come. The life of the world means what? What are we talking about here? Not necessarily. Yeah, loudly. Well, after the second coming, yeah, we have the life of the world. After the second coming is the judgment, the trial of the judgments, and where we end up. And then we have everlasting life, the kingdom. The kingdom comes. Okay, that's the everlasting life that Daniel's talking about. And that's what we profess every week. That's what we believe in. Okay? And this goes all the way back to Daniel in his prophecy. And Jesus was good at quoting Daniel. He quotes him several times. And I know one particular phrase is in chapter 7, if I remember correctly. And here's the microphone, if we can... Steve's begging for it already.
He's going to have more questions. I've been told not to ask questions.
Oh? I didn't say that. I said it? No. Okay. You can ask as many questions as you like, Gary. And more the merrier, because it brings out things that maybe I may not say. So it's a good thing. In fact, that's why I asked people to read this before they came here, so that we can have a discussion at times. So not just me running at the mouth. Okay.
The thing is that I'm sorry if I sometimes read these things twice, but it goes on and on. I forget about it. So
Well, you know what they say. Third time's the charm.
third time is a charm. Okay, maybe that's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it happens to me nowadays too. So don't feel like the Lone Ranger. I'm starting to forget things that I don't want to, but it happens. Okay, so that's where we left off. Now we're coming into what some scholars talk about as additions to Daniel. And it all depends on how you look at it, and actually which Bible you look at in these next three sections or chapters, if you will. So we have three of them that we're going to talk about today, which will end up Daniel. And these three additions, these three that we're going to talk about today, are not part of the Tanakh or the Jewish Bible. Okay. And if you remember back in the first chapter, back in the first day, I talked a little bit about language and how in Daniel we have Aramaic and Hebrew and some Greek, and it kind of goes back and forth. And remember, what was my point about that? That we're talking about Daniel, not to look at the language or the genre, the literature, the message, exactly. We're looking at the message that God is is giving to Daniel to give to us, not only the Israelites, but to us as well. So,
That could explain a lot of the, I want to say confusion, but more the differences in how people were translating, or not translating, but interpreting the Bible.
oh, exactly. Well, it has a great deal to do with it.
Because each language would have some, maybe, like you said, a nuance on
Exactly.
a particular word.
Right.
That wouldn't particularly conform to another one.
Yeah, something that is in Hebrew may mean something else, or may be said a different way in Aramaic. So yeah, it definitely does contribute. It gives the scholars gray hairs, I imagine, to try to sort this out. It takes them a long time to go ahead and do this, and I'm not a scholar of it. Yeah, I'm just.
You must be. You have the gray hair.
Well, thank you. You're very kind, but that has something to do. That's some other reason. I'm just handing out information I got from other people. Okay, so I'm trying to do this for the parish, and that's it.
So is that what the disciples did? They handed out the information that Jesus gave.
Yeah. Theirs was they suffered much more how you would say treatment than what you guys have shown me, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So, but anyway, so there was Aramaic and Hebrew, some Greek, but these three sections, if I remember right, these three are only found in the Greek. Okay, only in the Greek language. There's no Hebrew, there's no Aramaic to back it up. Now some of the scholars, if you read commentary Bibles, they'll say, well, there must be, but there isn't, physical paper, papyrus, reed, whatever you want to talk about, to look at for this, as far as I know. So it's not clear where the origins actually come from. However, these three sections that we're going to talk about today are canonical for us, for Catholics. They are part of our Bible. And the reason why I say that is because there are some denominations that don't accept it. And so they're part of what they call the Apocrypha, like the Protestants have a section of Apocrypha, and that's where usually you'll find these, depending on which denomination you're looking at. So you're going to find it in different ways. Like, I'll get to those when we get to the particular sections. There's different ways. Let me give you a few more things here. The first section we're going to talk about is the Prayer of Azariah and the Songs of the Three Youths. And these are found, okay, this is where we're getting into this again. They are found in chapter 3, like after verse 23, between 23 and 24, I believe it is. In some Bibles, they're in chapter 3. Now, but if you look at the other two, it's like one is Susanna, and the other one's the Bell and the Dragon. They're usually found at the end of chapter 12, usually as chapter 13 and chapter 14. But it depends on which Bible you look at. So like if you look at my commentary Bible, they put it as in the Apocrypha. If you look at our Bible here, Susanna is in chapter 3, and then 13 and 14 is Susanna and Bell and the Dragon. I have an NAB Bible, New American Bible, that has, after chapter 12, it has the word appendix, and then it has 13 and 14. So it depends on which Bible you look at, where to find it. But most Bibles are going to have it somewhere if you have one of these kind of Bibles. But if you go to the index, you can usually find it somewhere. So it's had, these sections, these chapters have had different lead-intos, like, as an appendix or part of the Apocrypha, or actually part of the following in sequence with the chapters in some of the Bibles. So with that in mind, we'll move on to the Prayer of Azariah and the Song of the Youths. And again, this could be in chapter 3 or in a separate section. The prayer and the song may not have any connection to Daniel. And there's different reasons for it, and these are people that look at, the genre, the type of language, the literature, the history, when it was written, and things like that. But if it's not part of Daniel, then that's why it would be, that would be part of the reason that it's part of, an addition or an appendix or whatever. Some actually see this as part of the Psalms. So it just depends on who you're reading and what their background, what they're basing this on. Now, they say that the origin of the prayer and song may be in Hebrew, Aramaic, or Greek, but again, this cannot be confirmed for sure. And most scholars say that there's no existing Hebrew or Aramaic. Okay. And again, this is found usually between chapter 23 and 24. This section of the prayer and song can be broken into three parts. The first part is a penitential prayer by Azariah. And here Azariah alone prays aloud to God, all by himself. He tells God that he, God, is worthy of praise, is just and righteous. Now, you remember, what are we talking about here? This is chapter 3, and what happened in chapter 3 with Azariah and the three youths? They were in the furnace, so that's what this is pertaining to.
Right, and then they were dancing and singing.
Well, oh yeah, they're having a good time. They were in the furnace, and so they and that's why it's in chapter 3. It's in that section where they are in the furnace. So while they're in the furnace, he's talking about how praiseworthy God is and how righteous and justifiable he is. So the predicament that they are in is because of their sins against God and turning away from God, and God's judgment is justified. So, in a sense, we talk about they, Azariah and the youths could be representative of Israel as a whole, the whole nation of Israel. In other words, he's talking about the sins that they have been committing through centuries and going against God. Even though they had the law of Moses, a lot of them would just ignore the law and do whatever they want, which we'll find in Susanna. Or some of them would twist the law for their own benefit. And so that's kind of what Daniel is leading up to. And in this prayer, Azariah asks for forgiveness and pleads for God's mercy. So he's the one in the fire, and if he's representing Israel and all the sins they committed, he's asking for mercy, not only for himself, but for Israel as a whole. Because it's believed that Israel was pushed into the exile, was punished because of all the bad things that they were doing, which we looked at in the other prophets, in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. So that's what that's all leading up to. Azariah goes so far as to ask God to accept their death as a martyrdom or as a sacrifice, to God. So now in the next section, so that covers like roughly verses 1 to 25. In the next section, it appears that Azariah's prayer has been answered. Daniel tells us about the appearance of a protecting angel that God has sent. Do you remember that? Do you remember how that went? Way a long time ago, a few weeks ago? Long time ago for me. So, and this is when they were in the fire and the angel came in. And even Nebuchadnezzar, the king that was there, he sees the angel himself. So the angel appears, he's able to see the angel. And the angel creates a moist wind and drives the fire out of the furnace. And Azariah and his friends suffer no pain or any problem. I mean, even the hair, as soon as you get near a fire with hair, it just goes poof. So even the hair is intact and everything's intact. You got that? So everything's intact. So, so nothing happened to him. The angel protected him. The angel was sent by God. So now in verse 28 to 68, this last section of Azariah's prayer, is the song of the three youths. And they are singing to God. And this part is the litany of praise and gratitude by the three that were in the furnace to God. It's a litany that starts with blessed and ends with the word forever. So they're praising God for the saving grace that was put upon them, that was granted to them by God. So by God sending the angel. So it's a very beautiful section of prayers to look at. So, what is a thing here that's maybe theologically speaking to us? What it was maybe an underlying thing here, you know, about the prayer of Azariah. Prayer works. That's what we're seeing here, is that the prayer worked. They prayed to God, God sent them an angel, and the prayer worked. Now, in our time, well, at any time, whenever we pray, we may not get the result we want, or we may get the result we want a month on the road. I'm not going to go into details, but one time I was praying for something in desperate need, so to speak, and it was like a year before, you know, it was answered. So it doesn't always happen, and it may not ever happen because God knows what's good for you. So he's going to, and he may not think that what you're asking for is good for you, you know, in the long run. The long run being in the kingdom. He wants you to be in the kingdom with him. So he's going to do everything he can to help you. So if you're praying for something, he thinks it's not going to help you get to heaven, then you might not ever see it. So, but
So you have to, I mean, you can't just mouth the words. You have to be sincere about it.
well, yeah, I would think so. Yeah, you want to be. It wants to be from the heart. When you say it's from the heart, then that's sincerity, and that's what you're thinking of. Now, you may start off. We talked about this with meditation as a side issue, but you start off with the mental prayer and thinking about these things. But the idea is to stick with it till it goes into your heart, and then what comes out of the heart comes out through your mouth, and you pray in that regard. So, and that's why, you know, meditation is a part of our Catholic faith. So we have several saints that have proven so, and help with the books they've written, help people that try to meditate to, they give instructions and guidelines on how to do that. So it's very moving material. So, okay, so that's very quick and short, to the point. Prayer of Azariah, the song. Questions, comments? I know you've been waiting for the end of the class, so we'll wait for complaints to the end of the class. All right. So we'll move on to chapter 13 then. Susanna. Okay. This story takes place in Babylon during the exile. Now, this is, I think it actually states that Daniel was very young at this time. It is canonical for us, but not in the Jewish Bible, as I said. Okay. And it's found as either chapter 13 or in some appendix or apocrypha section of the Bible. So in our Bible, in the Bible that we have in our church here, one the bishop was so gracious to send to us, I believe it has it as chapter 13. So Susanna was a daughter of Hilkiah. My Yiddish is kind of weak, so I think that's how it's pronounced. Hilkiah was possibly a priest. And so he had a daughter named Susanna. And Joachim was well-to-do and had a big garden, presenting a beautiful background for this story, which turns out to be kind of an ugly story in the beginning. But Joachim goes ahead and marries Susanna. Now, about the same time, there were two elders that were appointed judges. Now, elders were usually the community leaders, and they were called elders because they were old like me. And so supposedly, now I'm the exception, but supposedly the elders grew with wisdom, and so that's why the community would look towards them. In my case, it's not true. But anyways, so that's basically how elders came about as far as I know. But they were the leaders of the communities. And as judges, they were promoted them, not only from elders, but to judges. That's another separate role, in addition to being an elder. So as judges, their main role was to settle disagreements among the community, basically a courtroom type setting. You know, somebody has agreements with somebody, and the other person doesn't agree with that. They go and they see the judge. Take it to the judge.
Yeah, now this was in Babylon, so these judges were not the Jewish judges, were they?
Oh,
You
yeah.
know, they
Yeah, because
were.
in Babylon, the community was kept as a whole for the most part.
Oh,
Some of them were taken off to do be house servants, work in the fields, work in the military. But the community as a whole was kept together.
okay.
Yeah,
That
they were all kept
explains a
together,
lot.
and they had their own little community. They had everything set up just like they did in Israel. Yeah, everything was going great. I mean, I think even some kind of prayer service was even done, as long as you didn't ruffle anybody's feathers, so to speak.
Okay,
But,
that explains a lot, because when
Oh,
I
yeah.
first read it, I thought, well, they're in Babylon, that was probably part
Yeah.
of their,
No, no, these are judges. And in fact, to look, they had other duties besides the courtroom thing. And I believe if you look to the book of Judges, they list some duties that the judges have to do, from 1000 BC or whatever it was. So when you look at so the judges, so that kind of kept on as a tradition for judges down the line. So, So, in Susanna's story, Joachim was well-to-do, had a big house, big garden area, and so they would meet in his house, okay, because it facilitates the community. It was probably somewhere centrally located. It was big to house community, because whenever you had a trial, it was a community trial. It wasn't just 12 people. It was, the community, whoever wanted to be there, I guess. I'm not really sure about that. I have to go back to the Book of Judges. But the community could be there. It was a community trial. So these judges, these elders that became judges would be at Joachim's house frequently for various things, their various duties. So after a period of time, the judges became attracted to Susanna. Okay. Now this was an abnormal and illicit and or immoral act, thoughts, because it involved lust after another woman. And this was going against the law of Moses. This desire that the judges had was usually when she was walking in the garden, because she would usually be by herself. She'd have maids tend to her, but then the maids would go off or she'd dismiss them and she'd be walking in the garden or whatever. So the judges were able to see her when she was by herself. So one day the judges decided to act on their desires, and when Susanna was alone, bathing in the garden, they had a bath, open bath in the garden. The judges approached her with an ultimatum. That is that you have illicit sex with them, or they'll accuse her of having sex with somebody else. Okay? And this would be punishable. If she had sex with somebody other than her husband, that was punishable by death, by the book of law of Moses. So this was putting Susanna in a very difficult situation. But Susanna chose not to consent to the sex. So she said no. Now, when this happened, she screamed loudly at that point, and everybody in the house heard her because it was all connected. So the next day they were gathering about in Joachim's house, and the judges told their story. So the judges brought this to Joachim's house because that's where they would have any kind of disputes. And so the judges brought this. They followed up on their threat to Susanna. You either have sex with them or we're going to accuse you of having an affair. So they do that. And as a result, they brought the accusations, then they went and summoned Susanna to the court. Now at the trial, these elders and judges, the ones that are making the accusations, the ones that were looking at illicit things here, laid hands on Susanna. So by laying hands, that means they are witnesses to what was happening. So, and usually this implies some kind of truth to the story, okay? That what they're saying is the truth. And a lot of people would probably believe them because they were elders first, and now they're judges. They didn't give up their eldership, if you want to call it. They were still elders and judges now. So a lot of people probably believed them. And what the judges say is that after dismissing the maids behind closed doors, that Susanna met with a man under a tree. Had an affair with him under the tree. And again, because these witnesses were elders, they were believed. Now, Susanna is sentenced to death. Okay? Very interesting, because what hasn't happened? Well, the other side hasn't been presented. Yeah, we're going to talk about that. Yeah. Well, we'll get to that. God's very righteous. He'll get it straightened out. So, as a commentary, in this story we have the illegal things, immoral things, or bad things happening. For example, the lust, which is against, is a sin, deceit, attempted rape, so to speak, false accusations, you know, and condemning the innocent. So all these are things that happened to Susanna by the elders. And this looks very familiar to people that read this that are Israelites, because this looks like it's representative of some of the things that the Israelites were doing before the captivity, okay, before the exile. And so kind of to point out the fact that, you know, they might be here because of something you did, something they did in the past, like for hundreds of years. They would, like I said, they would abuse the law, and God got tired of that, and so then he took action, thus the exile. And so, so they have to, in that regard, you look at Susanna and the judges as representing a typical scene in Israel before the takeover, before the captivity. So now Susanna stood quietly as these judges spoke their lies because she trusted in the Lord. Okay? But after she was sentenced to death, she cried out to God as this trial was not valid because she was not given the opportunity to present her side. Okay? So, and that's part of the law of Moses. You know, both sides are allowed to speak. And she was prevented from doing that. So Susanna's prayer cries out for justice. But not only just justice, but what kind of justice? Who was she praying to? God? Divine justice. So she's looking for divine justice. She's looking for God to intercede and to help her. And that's because Susanna knows that God knows all things. And she believes in.
Were women allowed to present things in court?
I believe they were if they were accused. As far as I know, that's the way this story goes, yeah. So they weren't granted a whole lot of things. Maybe they weren't allowed to bring the suit, but if you were accused of something, then I believe the law would say. Now maybe this is an evolutionary thing in the law. You know, things don't really remain stagnant over hundreds of years. So maybe things evolved. You know, I'm not an expert on the law, so because we don't go by that law, do we? So I don't spend I got my time taken up in looking at the Bible, so I don't have time to look at the law of Moses. Do you know how many laws there are? Well, first, do you know how many laws there are? Yeah, 600 something. So that's enough. That's what I was trying to get across.
Yeah,
There's a lot.
I just remembered from past classes or something that, you know, the men were allowed to divorce the wives. I forget for what reasons. But was a
Well,
woman,
like adultery.
what?
Adultery, I think, was one
Yeah,
of them.
that's one. But was the wife allowed to
I don't
divorce
know.
the husband? I
I kind of doubt. I
think
think I remember seeing stuff where that wasn't. So that's what I'm saying. If she was accused of something, she might be able to put on a defense or say her piece. But as far as her bringing a case to the court, I don't know if that was allowed or not. But in any event, she was presenting the fact that she wasn't allowed to do this and was praying to God for help. And God, responding to the prayer, sends the Holy Spirit to inspire a young Daniel to speak up. And the emphasis here is on young Daniel, because he is part of the community after all. So if it was a community trial, people in the community were allowed to speak up if they had something important for the case, you know, relevant. But usually this would be reserved for who? A lot of this was reserved for the elders, the judges, you know, but Daniel was very young. This goes along again with the idea that with age comes knowledge and wisdom and things like that. So, but Daniel was very young, so some of the people may have been surprised that he spoke up. And he does so by pointing out that they did not follow the law, and actually accuses the elders and judges of lying. And not following the law was allowing Susanna to present her case. And but he goes further, takes it a step further, and actually accuses the elders, you know, the judges, elders/judges. He accuses them. Now, was he there? No, he wasn't there. So we're looking at, so we're looking at inspiration from God. In other words, that knowledge and wisdom was given to Daniel by God, that he knows the facts of the case, the true facts of the case. And so this is brought on by God. And if you remember when we were talking about the other chapters, what was one of the major themes that was running through Daniel? That was knowledge and wisdom given by God. God revealing things to Daniel, which has to do with knowledge and wisdom. You know, with the kings, interpreting the dreams. So these are kind of, some of these things are kind of factual, you know, like the statue was actually built and things like that. So this goes, you know, this is throughout the whole book about the things that were revealed to him. Okay?
So Daniel was just sitting around, and all of a sudden, or standing around, and all of a sudden, he has these ideas of God being in his mind, and presents it. These are the facts, you know, Daniel, present them for me.
Okay, well, I think first of all, I think he could stand or sit. I think it didn't matter. And actually, maybe part of the time he was lying down. A lot of times these came through as a dream.
But this, well, I guess it could, because you said it was the next day.
Yeah, the next day is when the judges came. Yeah, it was after the fact. It wasn't like, oh, you know, they did it right away. They came the next day. And so there may be other details here that are not in the thing about how long it took or whatever. But, you know, for God, all it took was an instant. You know, God could have just, I'm not saying that that's what happened. There's no statements in the text about him having a vision or having a dream. So that's how some of this stuff happens, is through a dream or a vision. If you remember, we battled a little bit with, what was it, Ezekiel? About going back and forth, whether he really was transported, you know, or was that part of a dream that was presented to him, that he felt that he was there because that was part of the dream that God gave him. So it's kind of a similar thing here. And they say that when you have some of these things, you're going to know it. You know, it's not like a, you know, a little subtle nudge. It's like, you know, it's in there, you know. So you're going to know that this is something that came from God. So, hi. Doing okay? So the other elders now are impressed with what Daniel knows. That he actually has knowledge of the case. Okay? So David is given the position of an elder, which is very unusual for someone who's young. That's why they point out the fact that he's very young, because usually you didn't obtain that position until you lived a while, seen a few things. So now, because he's an elder and he has these facts, he's now asked to impart some wisdom on the case. So Daniel separates the two judges. He tells the people to separate the two judges, and he's going to talk to them separately. They provide, so these two judges individually with, you know, separate, you know, one in one room, one in the other room, and they talk to Daniel, and they provide conflicting stories, mainly regarding the tree that the place where the alleged offense took place. And they go and they talk about the tree. One, I think it's called a mastic, and I think that's where we get mastic tape from. A little clergy humor there. Very little, huh? Okay. No, I tried. That's my best shot. But then there was another one that I think was like a oak of some sort, flowering or living oak they called. Anyways, they provide each offender, each of the elder / judge provided a different description of the tree. And so that's how the story fell apart. And because it fell apart, he proved Susanna's innocence. And then what happened after that?
Killed the judges, I guess.
Yeah, God's divine justice. You know, they were killed. And we see this a few times in Daniel. Remember that when they accuse Daniel, if Daniel's wrong, he gets thrown into the lions. If Daniel's right, the others get thrown in. Same thing with the fire, you know, and things like that. So this was a common practice in those days, it looks like.
I'm just looking here,
That on 56,
Oh, yes.
Yes.
I'm about to get to that.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll wait for
Thank
you.
you.
I'll wait for you then.
I'll give you your $10 later for being my straight man.
Should I say what I was just saying?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Then he put him aside and commanded them to bring the other and said to him, "You offspring of Canaan and not of Judah, beauty has deceived you." And he's saying that of these Canaanites, they're still the evil ones themselves.
Well, in this particular case, yeah. So, yeah. Well, I'm glad you didn't take my thunder away. I've got more to add to that. So, but yeah, to answer your question, sure. Yeah, I think there's more to it than that, which I'm going to get to. But I don't think he was saying that just because they were Canaanites. But I think they were somebody did something wrong, and by the way, they are Canaanites, that kind of thing. So now at the end of this, so that was the end of Susanna. And so a few comments here at the end here. Remember I talked about some bad things that were happening with Susanna? Well, here are some good things. We'll end on a good note with Susanna, I mean. I've been living in Georgia too long. That there was modesty and humility. This is shown with Susanna because she had a veil. Okay? She was covered with a veil, which is a sign of modesty and humility. Okay? Now some, depending on what translation you look at, some of them don't have the veil. So it just depends. But in the one I was looking at, it had a veil. And so the sign of humility and modesty. She also showed a sign of faith, right? So how did she show a sign of faith? What did she do when she was accused and sentenced to die? She prayed. She prayed to God. You don't do that if you don't believe. Well, maybe some people would, but usually they don't. I don't think. I'm not one of them, so I can't say that for sure. But you know, that's a sign of faith that she had. So we have righteousness, okay, which is, Susanna is used in this case to show divine righteousness because she was the victim of unjust accusations. And so God came to her rescue. And that was part of that was because of prayer. Again, we have prayer here that shows that prayer does work. And so when she prayed, then Daniel came to her rescue through the help of God and revealing divine justice in the long run. And so this provides hope. And this hope is, this faith and hope that Daniel is promoting here is for in the nation of Israel. Okay? So if we go to 56 and 57 of Susanna, says, "Then putting him to one side, he ordered them to bring the other. And he said to him, 'You offspring of Canaan, and not of Judah, beauty has beguiled you, and lust has perverted your heart. This is how you have been treating the daughters of Israel. And they were intimate with you through fear. But a daughter of Judah would not tolerate your wickedness.'" So we have three countries mentioned here. Three nations, rather, I guess what they're called. You got Canaan, Judah, which is what? Where is Judah? Southern kingdom. And Israel, in this case, the northern kingdom. Remember, Israel can be either the whole nation or the northern nation. So here it's the northern nation. So you have three countries that are put in, and how all these countries, you know, these three countries were destroyed. Right? Israel was torn apart. Canaan went down with it too. Canaan was maybe even before Judah, or before Israel fell, you know, from the Assyrians. So that was, so they were all, you know, and so like if the Assyrians take the Canaanites and the Babylonians take the Assyrians, well, the Canaanites belong to the Babylonians now, so they're conquered, so to speak. Okay. Unless they, you know, do an uprising, break away.
Is Canaan all from the offspring of Canaan from that Noah kicked out?
I'd have to go back and look. My memory's starting to fail me. So we did talk about that when we did the Pentateuch, I think. But I have to go back and make sure. I don't remember. Question? Comments? Steve?
The Canaanites were also known to be very, very immoral amongst the Hebrew people.
Yeah, and part of that was because of what? Their faith. They were pagans. Not to say that all pagans are bad, I really don't know. But when you live a pagan lifestyle, if you read some of the books, not only just the Bible, but other history books and things like that, there was a lot of nasty stuff being done in those areas where Israel, even though they committed a lot of crimes, they were against God. And so a lot of the things that they did were, when we talk about the sins of Israel, it doesn't mean that everybody did this. Okay, probably the majority of the people were just everyday hardworking people. But your leaders and your people that you're following or whatever, they. Right.
So, are you saying that the Canaan, the people weren't Jewish?
No, they weren't.
Okay, so then he's really putting a dig on these people. Then he says, you're the Canaanites.
And maybe he had a personal thing against them. I don't know. Yeah, well, maybe the guy was a Canaanite. I don't know.
But what the judges Canaanite? How could they be Canaanite?
Well, you can convert.
You could have just been insulting them.
Yeah. 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 That's what he was talking about, right? Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So it doesn't really go into clarity about what was going on here. At least I haven't found it. So, but the bottom line was that this is a reference to the problems that were happening in the area, and God took care of it. Okay, He's bringing divine justice to the area because of the way that people were acting, regardless of what your nationality is. It looks like. Okay. But yeah, the Canaanites were not well liked by the Israelites at all, or the Ammonites or the Edomites. Everybody outside. They were all against Israel, and so Israel didn't like them either. So. Okay. Any other questions on 13? Comments? Complaints are later. Okay, chapter 14 then talks about Bel and the dragon. This is kind of interesting. So these.
It's not a Disney thing, right? Bel and the Dragon?
No, but I'm getting there. I got another clergy joke for you coming up here. So these stories again come from the Greek translation. Usually it's believed to be, or the one I looked at was Theodotion, Theodotion. Might not be pronouncing that right, but he was a scholar that wrote in the first and second century AD. So that's the version I was looking at here, which again was written roughly in probably the 2nd century. Now, the Bel and Dragon are combined as one story, so to speak. It's in one chapter, and this may be a reference to the Babylonian god Marduk. We're not talking about Marmaduke here. You saw that coming, didn't you? You did. So, you thought, yeah, I did too. I was like, did I read that right? So we're talking about Marduk, who was the statue. And then he actually had a dragon too. So he was portrayed as a statue for himself and then a dragon be with him. So this is kind of a reference to those times and that pagan god. These stories occurred during Cyrus's reign, which is, Cyrus is who now? He's a Persian. He's the one that freed the Jews, freed the Israelites, sent them home. So there's, again, controversy whether the story was written back, actually, during those times, or was written later. Or a lot of times things would start out as a tradition, oral tradition, that later would be put to pen, put to paper, and so that's how it could come about. And again, there's no Hebrew or Aramaic version that exists for this chapter, these stories. So the goal of these stories was to show foolishness of pagan worship, that divine protection of the faithful Jews exist, and also some cleverness on Daniel's part. So one thing we'll see is how food plays an interesting role in these stories. Okay? So we start off with Bel. Daniel tells that Cyrus, Daniel tells us that Cyrus is the king. And we already heard in chapter 6 how Daniel became a servant of Cyrus back in the 6th chapter, how he became a servant and a confidant and whatever in the court. And remember in the beginning chapter, maybe in the first chapter, we talked about how Daniel went through this assimilation project, where the Babylonians, first with the Babylonians. And so if he was in the courtroom with the Babylonians, then it might only be natural that he be transferred into the court of the Persians when they took over. So anyways, doesn't really tell us for sure. But Cyrus worshipped this false god, Bel. And what was interesting was that the people would feed it. So Steve says, like, yeah, of course, why not? As if he's a living God, right? So they would feed him flour, sheep, wine, and they would do it in large quantities. And then one day Cyrus asked Daniel why he doesn't worship Bel. And Daniel answered Cyrus by telling him that he should not be fooled. So Daniel's telling Cyrus, you're being a fool. So that's kind of dangerous territory to talk to the king like that. But he did. He told Cyrus that Bel was made of human hands and that he was made of clay and bronze. So what is clay and bronze? Does that ring any bells? Yeah. Say again?
False gods.
The false gods, and that was part of the makeup of the statue. Okay, the one they built and the one that was in the dream and things like that. It's particularly the feet, I think it was. And he also said that he couldn't eat a thing. He can't eat anything. He's just a handmade statue. But Daniel said, he went further and said that he worships the living God. Very important, the living God, the creator of all things. And I think I was going to read verse 5. This is in Bel. This is in Bel. I think it's 5, yes. Because I do not revere idols made with hands. And that was a common comment made to people that were pagan worshipers. It's like, you guys made this thing last week, or whatever. You made this. How can you say this is a god? That's one thing I always strikes me when I read that in the Bible, because it's in quite a few places, about their handmade. Okay. He says, I do not revere idols made with hands, but the living God, who created heaven and earth and has domination over all living creatures. So he even extends it further about him creating the universe, basically, creating everything that they see. So the priest set up a test for the king and Daniel. And they leave the king, and the king will put out the food and the wine for Bel. So the priests are setting up this test. Okay, king, what we're going to do is you're going to go ahead and feed the god. You're going to feed Bel. And we're going to let you take care of all of it. You and Daniel, you go ahead and take care of it. So, and then you place your seal on it. They always had, back, I don't know if it was that far back, but they had a ring. You put the wax on it, you put the ring in there, and it's sealed. That's the seal. So that if you open the door, that would break, so to speak. So they do that. And of course, the loser dies. All right? We just heard this a minute ago. The loser's going to die. But Daniel's very clever here, right? He pulls a fast one, so to speak. So he does this by having ashes scattered on the floor in the temple there. And he did this in front of the king. So the king saw him put all these ashes all over the floor. And he made sure the king was out of the way. And he would back out so none of their footprints would be there. And then in the middle of the night, the priest, wives, and children entered the temple through a secret trap door to eat the food. They must have had a good time, because when you read about the quantities of wine that went into this, that was a lot of wine. So they had a little feast. And I think this was only a weekly thing. I can't remember for sure. But anyways, so they would go through this trap door and eat all the food. And then, of course, when everybody came in, it's like, oh, look, Bel ate the food, drank the wine. So that's why he was a living God, so to speak, as they looked at it. Well, then in the morning, the king and Daniel went to the temple to check out the food situation. And the food was gone, of course. And at first the king thought that Bel had ate the food and said, look, Daniel, he ate it. Like I said, he's a living God. But Daniel stopped him from going in and pointed to the floor and pointed at all the footprints in the ashes. And the king, I think it was the king that actually said, look, there's adult footprints, there's children's footprints in there. So that was the clue, probably mainly that the children's footprints were there. That would be the key as opposed to maybe Daniel sneaking in and doing something. So there was children's footprints in the ashes. And this outraged the king. He was mad at the priest for doing this and their families. So they lost. So what happened? They were put to death. Okay. And we're talking about 70 families. I think the Bible actually mentions that there were 70 priests, let's say. And then they each had families, or probably. So the king gave the temple to Daniel to do what he wanted, and he destroyed it. And that was the end of that. Now, and it's interesting ending here because if you consider the temple in Jerusalem, now even though I think we said this was Cyrus, but Jerusalem was taken over by the Babylonians and destroyed. So the Babylonians got taken over by the Persians. So even though this was done in the Persian setting, so to speak, it still was a blow at the Babylonians for, it's kind of irony that they destroyed the Israelites' temple, and now Daniel was able to have their temple destroyed. Because even though they weren't killed, not all the Babylonians were killed, so there's probably Babylonians in there worship this god. And I think Marduk was a Babylonian god, if I remember right. Okay, that takes care of Bel. Bel's done. He's gone. Yeah.
So the pagans would feed their inanimate god,
Yeah.
but they would bring food into the temple. Isn't that exactly what the Jews were doing? Maybe for a slightly different reason. My question is, which one started first? I mean, were the Jews taking food into the temple and the pagans mimic that, or is it vice versa?
Well, you're talking about in Jerusalem, the
Yeah.
temple of Jerusalem?
Mhm.
The food was taken as an offering, a burnt offering,
Well, yeah,
sacrificed. But it wasn't consumed.
by the priests and
Well,
their
by the
families.
priests, but yeah, everybody knew that.
Mhm.
There was portions of it that was set aside for the priests, that they
Right.
would eat that portion, right?
But it just seems there's a great similarity between the two, for different reasons, I admit. But it seems like there's a big similarity. Was one first and the other one sort of mimicked the other?
No, because the Babylonians and Persians, they were worshiping the god. They said that the god ate the food. They didn't say that the priest ate the food. It was strictly Bel that did it, not the priest. They weren't involved in it at all. They just brought it as a sacrifice to Bel, and then they would lead the temple. So this is entirely different than what the Israelites were doing. They wouldn't sacrifice the food in there. I mean, they would bring in the sheep. It doesn't really go into detail whether they slaughtered them or not, but in the Jewish temple, they was always slaughtered outside. Then it was brought in, and if you had a burnt offering, then the food was burnt, and things like that. So, but I think it's two different situations. So,
Okay.
It kind of reminded me of,
While you're talking is, when they were in the 40 years in the desert, and Moses up there getting the 10 Commandments, and you're down there making a golden statue, and then apparently worshiping the golden statue that they were made by
yeah. Yeah, that's basically what was happening here. Bel was just a statue that was made by human beings.
I just want to say that all worship requires sacrifice of some type. The difference between what's happening with King Cyrus's people and Hebrews is that the Hebrews, there was no deceit involved in it. They knew that they were going to sacrifice a bull for this one and a lamb for this one. And like Deacon says, a portion of it went to the priest. But with King Cyrus, it was just a complete house of cards. It was this statue that had this hidden door underneath it that they would come out at night when the door was sealed, and they would eat all the food left behind. So it was all based on lies. That just also shows to us, as we're looking back, and of course the Hebrews already recognized that that was a false god. It wasn't true. He had no power. He really was just something made by human hands.
Maybe that would make a difference for you, Gary, is like what she said about the deceit. You know, everybody knew that the priest ate a certain portion, and, you know, whatever, depending on the sacrifice. There were several types of sacrifices. The ultimate one was the burnt offering. But there were times when they ate, and everybody knew it. So there was no deceit, nothing deceiving anybody about. And so in the temple, in the Jerusalem, in the Israelite temple, God dwelled in the center, so to speak, in the very center, in the Holy of Holies. Well, even the high priest didn't go in there but once a year, and he was the only one allowed in. And they watched, because there were times when somebody would go in there, what was it, Aaron and his brother maybe? I can't remember. But, you know, one did go in, a priest, and everybody knew about it. So, you know, the other priest would watch and kind of guard, you know. So there was no deceit. There was nothing that would be, you know, there's no deceit in going in there. There's no proclamation that this God is eating and drinking, you know, that our God, the Israelites' God, is eating and drinking. There was no proclamation of that I know of in the Jewish faith. So.
The Jewish laws of priests had to be purified. Like it said there, some, they weren't purified, they died.
Yeah. So there's very rigid controls over all this. Part of the law of Moses, probably, where with Baal and the dragon, it was, you know, it was all deceit and just propping up this wind or stone statue, whatever it was. So. Okay. Other questions?
Are we done with this?
No, we got the dragon to do.
Okay.
That's very quick.
Go with the dragon.
I'm sorry?
I think go with the dragon.
Go with the dragon. You like the fire, huh? You want to see some fire? Brimstone? Now this one contrasts a little bit with the one with Baal. Here the king pronounces the dragon as a living god. So they're not going to give up. You know, we have this statue, this false god. Okay, we're not going to, okay, he's not going to be our god. We've got a living one over here now. So, in other words, he uses Daniel's words in describing God as a living God, and wants Daniel to worship the dragon. And the dragon is living. But Daniel says, I can kill that dragon without touching it. You know, it's like, name that tune, you know. So he says that he can kill this dragon without touching it. And I lost my place. What am I doing? So the king goes in and gives him permission to do this. And so Daniel, they go into some elaborate description about these cakes. He cooks up this tar and feathers maybe and some other things and makes out this little cake that he goes and gives it to the dragon. And what happens? Yeah. Puff the magic dragon. So the dragon eats the cakes and he's gone. He dies. So now the Babylonians, instead of turning on Daniel, because now they're starting to get the feel that, you know, this is a lost cause, we're not going to win there. So now they start going after the king. And so they accuse him of becoming a Jew, of becoming an Israelite, and favoring Daniel. So they demanded that, you know, and this is kind of like an ultimatum, you know, well, you give us Daniel or else you're the one who's going to suffer this. They didn't really say that, but that's what it looks like. They want Daniel. They go after Daniel, and they go through disparaging remarks to the king in order to get this done. So the Babylonians get their wish. They throw Daniel into the lion's den. And there's 7 lions inside, and there's that magic number again, 7, which means completeness, wholeness. So that means everything is there. Everything can happen with these 7. And he's inside there for what, 6 days, right? So now, if you remember, if you go back to Daniel chapter 6, I think it's verse 16 on, he was thrown into the lion's den back then too. Or how long?
1 day.
1 day. And now he's thrown in for how many? There's that magic number again.
Seven.
7 days, yes. So that's the completeness, that's the fullness of this. That means that, this is probably going to be the end of it, but, we'll wait and see. Yeah.
Wouldn't they have learned by now that throwing Daniel into a lion's den would obviously not work?
Well, you would think, so some people are just stubborn like that,
This is the young Daniel.
Yeah. That's like my kids. Every time they do something bad, I take the candy away and they wondered why. And then they go ahead and do it again anyways. So, you learn through repetition, I guess. So, but yeah, they didn't learn their lesson. So anyways, now I mentioned this before, that usually the prophets don't talk or mention other prophets in their book. But in this case, Daniel writes about Habakkuk. And Habakkuk prepares a meal for his workers in the field, and he's about to take it out to them when an angel appears to him and tells him that I want you to take this food to Daniel in the den in Babylon. Well, Habakkuk replies that he knows nothing of Babylon. He doesn't know where it's at or even what to do or go there. Now, this is an interesting point, just as a side issue, that he doesn't know anything about Babylon, because a good part of Habakkuk's book is about Babylon and the abuse of the Israelites. So it's kind of interesting that he said that. So, but anyways, the point of the story is that the angel had to pick him up and take him over there, okay? Picked him up by his crown, I think they called it. But anyways, Habakkuk was picked up and taken over to the den where Daniel was. And Habakkuk says, and I will read this is 37, verse 37. Then Habakkuk shouted, Daniel, Daniel, take the food that God has sent you. Daniel said, you have remembered me, O God, and have not forsaken those who love you. Okay, a good message, that you haven't forsaken me, which means that he still has what? Faith. Faith in God. He hasn't given up on, praying to God and talking to God. So, and then God has responded, showing again that there's response, there's there's value in prayer, that you can, that prayer does work. So after that, the angel took Habakkuk back home. So on the 7th day, the king arrives, finds Daniel alive, and pulls him out, and puts the people that wanted Daniel put in the den to what? To death. He puts them to death. It's the same old song and dance, The ones that didn't prove right, this is, what was the saying with the witches? It was death by drowning, or proof, they would drown them, and then if you lived through the drowning, you were telling the truth, or something like that. It's kind of like that. And then what did he do? What did the king do?
He praised
Yeah.
the God of Israel.
Praise the God of Israel. Does that sound familiar? This is like the 6th time or something or whatever. 5th, 6th time that this has actually happened.
This is the same one, right?
I think this is Cyrus we were talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a what do you want to call it? Similar situation. Yeah, he was the big one there. Okay, so now some comparisons. One, Bel is not living, but the dragon is living. Okay, and the other one has to do with food. So Bel couldn't eat the food, but the dragon could. So no matter how you come, no matter what angle you come from on this, as far as the story goes in Daniel, no matter how, the kings try to persuade him that, that their pagan god is more powerful or whatever, then Daniel was able to find a way to prove them wrong. Okay, and some small differences here between 13 and 14, which is the ones we ended with in chapters 1 through 6. In 1 through 6, there's a lot of divine revelation, probably prevalent in the book there. Where in 13 and 14, there's some cleverness on Daniel's part, on his own, that he did here, okay? Even though he was given some wisdom here and there. So before it was strong guidance from God. Here a little bit from Daniel. So that may be part of the reason why they don't lump it with Daniel, those that don't. Okay.
There used to be dreams too.
Yeah, that was the first, 1 through 6 is all about dreams and the interpretation of dreams. Sure. So, guess what? You guys can complain now.
Yeah, if you, I've got a question, is it's not according to this, well, if you bear with me here, yesterday I received, or I got my paper from the diocese. And of course, our bishop always likes to have about 3 pages worth of things to read, which I always liked.
Wait a minute, let me turn this off.
But Bishop Kurt, he started off with, death has no power, or death, whereas I think death has no power.
Mhm.
And then he has 1,000 examples and says so much stuff. But anyway, during that time, he also says that, or intimated that before the 10 Commandments, there was only one commandment, and that was at Noah's time, thou shalt not kill. So I remembered this, and I had looked this up even before I got the paper and everything else. But in chapter 9, I think, of the Genesis, when the flood was over and God said that, we would no longer destroy man because man is evil to begin with. Not evil to begin with, but it has sin to begin with.
Mhm.
And he says, but I will watch something to the effect, you have to get 9 to really get it, but something to the effect that I'm going to watch over everything, and there's a man who is killed or his blood has been shed by another man, that man blood must be shed by another man.
Okay.